When you see Borobudur, your eyes move gradually upward. But when you see Habitat 67, your focus spread all the masses, but slowly shift toward the overlapping masses. Yes, in Borobudur, it is easier for us to focus on the top because the visual intensity is controlled gradually. Through layering and elevation, our eyes move upward from the bottom to the middle and finally to the top. The low levels have dense relief and heavy walls, but as we move upward, the geometry becomes simpler and the space becomes more open. The bottom feels more enclosed and solid, while the upper levels gradually introduce more empty space and open sky. This openness around the top make it visually dominant. The reduction of complexity creates focus, and the higher level feel more important. Everything visually support the climax at the top. That is the hierarchy of Borobudur. However, this is different with 67. 67. However, this is different with Habitat 67, which is fragmented and asymmetrical, but the hierarchy still exists. In a composition like this, if every model were completely different, it will feel chaotic. When every model were identical, it will feel flat. So what it needs is unity and variation, repetition with contrast, and order with complexity. To create the visual hierarchy in Habitat 67, the model repeat with variation. Some protrude, some are staked higher, and some create terrace. This create depth and shadow, especially through the cantilevers. Certain masses feel heavier or more dominant because they project outward. This also creates voids between the masses, helping distinguish the primary and secondary forms. This hierarchy comes through composition. Even though it looks random at first, the composition still contains dominant cluster, secondary grouping, and supporting modules. At first glance, it may look random and chaotic, but it is actually carefully organized. So, yes, in hierarchy, not everything should scream for attention. That is what makes design feel balanced and well-designed. Everything is organized even when it appears random. Let's see with two-dimensional design. We can see hierarchy in color. Even though there are different stroke thickness, in this example, with the thickest stroke is the lightest. Even though the thickest stroke are larger than the thin, dark stroke, it's perceived as bolder and stronger because it is more visible, appears closer, and feels more in focus. Next is hierarchy in depth. There are different colors, but this time the shape also vary in size and blur effects. This creates an illustration of depth. It's not only about which shape appears closer, but also which shape appears the clearest to us. Shapes that are more in focus tend to attract the eye more effectively. Okay, now let's move to a two-dimensional image of architecture plan. We often see floor plans where the section walls are drawn with the thickest and darkest line. This helps us focus on the cut section of the drawing, while furniture is usually drawn with thinner and lighter lines because it's less important visually. Additionally, in floor plans, some rooms are larger than others, which usually suggests that those rooms are more important, while the smaller rooms act more as supporting spaces or surface areas. Sometimes, the more important spaces are also placed at the front or in the most prominent part of the building, while secondary spaces are placed further behind. What I've explained before about Borobudur and Habitat 67 is about visual hierarchy. However, both of projects also contains other type of hierarchy, such as spatial, symbolic, spiritual, and experiential hierarchy. This visual hierarchy is also connected to the spatial hierarchy. Borobudur is arranged vertically into different levels. The higher you move, the simpler the space becomes, the quieter it feels, and the more secure it becomes. So the hierarchy is experienced through elevation. Spiritually, Borobudur represents Buddhist cosmology, which is divided into three zones. The lowest level is called Kamadhatu, representing the world of desire. It contains dense relief filled with visual information, symbolizing human desire and earthly attachment. Above that is Rupadhatu, the middle level. It is still physical and form-based, with structured galleries and repetitive rhythms. At the top is Arupadhatu, the upper circular terrace. This area is very minimal, with open sky. There's ornamentation in almost pure geometry. This transition is extremely important because it creates spiritual hierarchy. The higher you go, the closer you become to alignment or spirituality. This is hierarchy through abstraction. Now, moving to the Habitat 67. The visual hierarchy comes from the overlapping modular forms that create a maze-like composition. Yes, again, at first glance, it looks random, but it is actually well organized. Here, Maghfy was trying to create an experiential hierarchy by establishing clear transition between public, semi-public, and private space. There are shared circular paths, terraces, and finally private residential units. This was very important because Habitat 67 tried to combine the density of apartment living with the quality of suburban housing. This is why the private terrace becomes such an important element in the hierarchy of spatial experience. The project also creates hierarchy through voids. Voids are not just leftover space. They create lighting, views, ventilation, and visual poses. They establish a relationship between solid and empty spaces. One interesting thing about Habitat 67 is the hierarchy actually emerged through composition, spatial relationship, and user's experience. This is something we often see in modern, metabolist, and modular architecture. Hierarchy is not about always creating ornamentation or classical symmetry. Instead, it can emerge through layering, density, and experiential qualities. So overall, hierarchy is about an order and prioritization. 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 So English is not my first language. That is how actually hierarchy works. So I hope this video helps you to understand the concept of hierarchy in architecture, and this can be useful for all of you who are watching this. And yeah, I'm still learning on also developing my skill in this field. Bye.